So I think we'll start. Oh, and I've just gone out of main display mode. Okay, so on behalf of the Prime movement, and in particular the Prime UK and Ireland Working Group on Careers and Sustainability, a warm welcome to this session. Particular welcome to Sarah Webster, our speaker, but Karen is going to introduce her in a few minutes. If you've been to one of our sessions before, then you'll know that what we do is just spend 2 minutes at the beginning introducing Prime and our working group in particular, because at every meeting, there are new people who've joined us and who may not know the context in which we are gathering today. So if you've seen this before, get your sandwich out, get your cup of tea out, and just sit back and just allow this to wash over you for a couple of minutes. But hopefully it will be, for some of you, a useful context-setting exercise. So Prime, the Principles for Responsible Management Education, is a United Nations initiative closely associated with the Global Compact that many of you will know if you are connected to the world of business. Our 3 missions are to develop responsible decision makers now and in the future, to advance sustainable development, as you might expect as a UN organization aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and a broader task and to achieve those other 2, which is to transform the nature of management education where it needs that transformation in that direction. So we operate under 7 principles. You'll be relieved to know I'm not going to read through all of those, but you will obviously, if you're not familiar with them, be reassured, I hope to know, that they relate to our purpose, our values, our teaching, our research, right across the board, including all of our practice and our work with partners, wherever those partners may come from. And we try also to be a learning network, a learning initiative in terms of sharing successes and failures with each other, because this is not a straight road that we're going down towards, a more sustainable future. There are pitfalls along the way, and we make errors along the way as well. So why does this matter? Many of you will have seen this slide before, but I always go back to it. It's because 30% of the world's tertiary education students study business management and economics, and that means about 70 million graduates per year. That makes us a very significant contributor to higher education, and our students, therefore, a very significant contribution to the practice of sustainability in the workplace after they graduate. So there couldn't be a more compelling reason than that to be doing what we are doing in relation to sustainability, responsibility, and ethics. Now, Prime is a global network. Something like 3 million students are in Prime aligned and Prime membership organizations, and you can see the other data there as to where we operate across the world. If you're a member of Prime, you have opportunities as an institution, you have opportunities to be active within a chapter, to take on what's called Prime Champions status, which is a kind of competitive process for taking on a leading role as a school over a period of a year or sometimes 2, of joining in the work of a Prime working group. Some of them operate globally. This is a working group that operates within the UK and Ireland, certainly for now. And there's also Prime Global Students, which is a student-powered, student-organized led initiative running right across all of the chapters. To bring it home for a moment to the Careers and Sustainability Working Group, we've been running for just over 2 years now. We welcome any new interest from people. We've built up to a network of approximately 150 people. We have run this year, I think this is our 5th webinar that we've run this year. Thank you, Sarah, for being our 5th and final contributor during this academic year. And we're actually running at the moment 3 ongoing research projects. Just a brief word on those in a moment. So we posed at the beginning of the working group, and when we set it up, we posed a series of questions which have remained relevant over the last couple of years. And in particular, the 2 that probably best align with what Sarah's contribution is today are those questions: how do business schools best engage with business sectors and industries to understand the impact of sustainability imperatives on their jobs of the future? And how do developments such as these challenge traditional models of graduate employability? Many of the other questions are going to be relevant as well, but those are the 2 that really stand out for me. So apart from our webinars, what are the 3 projects that we're currently working on in collaboration with other universities? That when I say we, that's Oxford Brookes, because the leadership of the network has come out of Oxford Brookes. But this is the first collaboration is in relation to a survey that we've run, and we're going to publish the results of over the coming months in relation to the supply of and demand for placement, internship, and graduate roles involving sustainability, as it says in its wider sense. And you can see our collaborators the 8 universities, I think, in all, and also the UN Global Compact, who've been a very powerful and useful collaborator on this one. Our second project is in relation to subject benchmark statements. I won't go through the detail, but it's in relation to the way in which they do or they don't support sustainability skills and competency development. If anybody's interested in this project, then the contact details are there. We'll circulate them afterwards as well. But Richard and I know I saw Mohammed arriving from Bedfordshire, and Richard from NTU are leading that. And the third project that I just want to introduce, if you may not have heard of before, this didn't actually start its life as a Prime project, but Karen and I are certainly intending that we bring it under the Prime umbrella as it develops. This is a QAA-funded Collaborative Enhancement Project Award, which was awarded in February of this year. The kickoff for the project was actually the 1st of May, so we're only just getting going properly. You can see the collaborators there, all of whom are Prime members, although actually our initial connections in those universities were not in business schools, they were in other faculties as well. But the idea is that we are going to generate over the next year some hopefully useful guidance on how higher education can better support green skills development through involving employers and students and staff, looking at how we align better ESD, employability skills development, green workforce needs, and that very amorphous area of what's called green skills, where there are multiple definitions, multiple frameworks, and we're trying to make sense of all of these to provide some useful HE guidance. So that's what that's the third of our projects as the working group. There's different ways to contact us, which we'll pop into the chat box a little bit later on. And at this point, I want to hand over to my colleague, my ever so valuable colleague with whom I do so many things at Brooks and beyond, Karen Cripps, who will introduce our speaker for today, Sarah. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much. And it's great to see so many familiar faces here. We're all very hungry to be understanding industry perspectives on green skills and understanding how we can build that into the curriculum. And Sarah is definitely going to deliver for us on that. She's had an extensive career, not only in sustainability, but describes this as cross-functional experience with finance and marketing. In her role at Britvic as Sustainability Director, she worked and led the Healthier People, Healthier Planet strategy that aligns to the Sustainable Development Goals. And her mission, she describes, was to ensure that sustainability is part of everyday decision making. And I really like her description as a values-driven, tenacious leader. And as we know, with the current climate of sustainability, that tenacity is very much needed. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much. All right, let me just make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Yes, I think we are. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Karen and Jonathan, for the introduction. So yeah, my name is Sarah Webster. And until very recently, I was the Sustainable Business Director at Britvic PLC, and I'm going to be talking to you this afternoon about the sustainability skill set and how that manifests in different roles across the organisation. So let me just Zoom quit unexpectedly. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to don't send. Can you still see me there?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Yeah. See and hear.
Good. Don't send. Let's just, and can people see the right screen? I think you can.
Yes, I think yes. Move forward. Yeah, I think. Oh, no, your slides just went. And you look muted. Can you hear us? Because you're muted.
Unmute and share. Let's do that one.
Something's coming back.
Something's coming back.
Yes, there we go. We're off.
Brilliant. Okay. So before I start, I just wanted to reflect, and my slides haven't changed. So let me go. Here we go. Brilliant. So before I start, I have a confession. And I often start here because it's very easy when we work in sustainability to come across as rather worthy. And it's time to get off the soapbox because the reality is that none of us have all of the answers and none of us are perfect. So I start with this climate confession. I have to say it's courtesy of Stuart Goldsmith, who is a comedian. I don't know if you've seen his set up at Edinburgh, but he's also coming to the Oxford Literary Festival for his new set in July. So quick prompt for him there. And if he talks about him driving his wife's diesel, he's lying. He's talking about me driving my husband's diesel. I gave him the inspiration for that. And I drove that down to Anthropy in Cornwall because, yeah, I have an EV, but I also get range anxiety. And it just goes to show that, you know, even though I work in sustainability, I'm incredibly passionate about it. It's really quite difficult to be perfect all of the time. And one of the key things around sustainability is we can't possibly wait until everything is perfect. We've just got to keep going and start. And then, you know, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, which I think is so important, you move forward, you learn, you course correct, and then you move forward again. But don't let waiting for perfection to hold you back from starting. Okay, so where did it all begin? I started, funnily enough, as an Oxford Brookes business graduate a long time ago, and I'm forever the pragmatist. I decided to carry on with my exams after I left university, and I became a management accountant on the Gillette graduate scheme. And the appeal of razor blades soon gave way to the appeal of Tanqueray and Tonic. And I spent 18 years of my career at Diageo, and it's here that I completed what I call my Diageo MBA. So every time there was a reorganisation, which was frequently and is even more frequently now in large organisation, it was an opportunity to learn something new and to get a new role. So this took me through mergers and acquisitions, marketing, a very large chunk in investor relations, which I loved for the most part. It enabled me to bring all of my previous knowledge together. I had the privilege to talking to our shareholders about our fantastic brands and storytelling, you know, telling stories from around the world. But it was at this time that I started, you know, to bring my interest in sustainability into my day job. And that's where I started probably 15 or so years ago, the Sustainability Investor Engagement Programme at Diageo, at a time when investors weren't particularly interested in this sort of thing. But I felt it was an important thing to do. And I did it as a bolt-on to my day job. So it's probably about 5% of my job, simply because I wasn't getting that many calls, and we were very proactive. We had webinars and we did roadshows on ESG, but it's very much push, push, push. You know, it's changed. I'm pleased to say it's changed quite a bit now, but we are going through waves, and I'll talk about that in a little while. I then became sustainable reporting director for Diageo, and that's where I first became familiar with the first rung, I should say, of the acronyms that we all love with sustainability. At that point in time, it was DJSI, so the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, UNGC, which UN Global Compact's already been talked about this morning, GRI, etc. After leaving Diageo, I then moved to GSK, again, another IR role with sustainability bolt-on, in the development of a sustainability strategy for the consumer business, which is now Haleon. But the lure of drinks brought me back, and I came back to Diageo and then ultimately on to Britvic, where I started in January 2020. So for those of you not familiar with Britvic, you might just think Britvic soft drinks. Actually, it's home to Robinson Squash, Tango Fruit Shoot, Jimmy's Iced Coffee, and a bottler for Pepsi. And it's now as of January this year, it's part of the Carlsberg Group. So you can see a real sort of blend from a business perspective. And you were talking about all the different sort of management leadership courses that all of you are involved with across the UK and I sort of tertiary education sector. So it all comes together in that. On joining Britvic, I was presented with a number of sustainability targets across calories, diversity, communities, carbon, water, packaging, and it was my job to come up with a strategy and a plan on how to deliver these. So before I go any further, I just wanted to pause and reflect on what some of those transferable skills are that I felt I had picked up in my previous roles, that equipped me to lead the sustainability agenda at Britvic. Now, I talked about storytelling and investor relations. That enabled me to leverage my cross-functional experience that I'd built up throughout my career. So there, and the other key element was the financial background. Not least because it helps with reporting, because there is an awful lot of reporting in sustainability. But, finance, whether we like it or not, is the language of business. There isn't a better alternative at the moment. Natural capital accounting is still in its infancy, and that is what business leaders understand. And so that is the language I feel we need to talk in to get them on side. So these elements combined together with sort of my values, gave me, I think, hopefully a pretty good grounding in how to come up with a strategy. I wasn't the only person at Britvic who had, we call them squiggly careers at Britvic. One of the sales directors went over to the US to get some international experience. Then he came back and he's now the production director for the UK business. And he is the one who was advocating for installing heat pumps in our Beckton factory. We have got lots of commercial people who have moved into sustainable procurement. And we have got R&D people who are working on new liquids to make them healthier, and that sort of thing. So there's so many moves that people are bringing that cross-functional and those transferable skills to their sustainability roles. Now, I mentioned this before, sustainability has been called many things over the time, and it's sort of manifested in very different ways. And it started off as philanthropy, probably, several decades ago. And it has evolved, a lot over the last 20 years. And we're operating in a very, a very hostile environment, I shall say, for sustainability at the moment. An awful lot of negative hubris around the sustainability agenda, from accusations of woke to the unaffordability of transitioning away from fossil fuels. Now I think it's time to change our approach and our language again. Moving away from sustainability and particularly, fiery ESG to the language of business opportunity, resilience, and adaptation. Because climate change is real. We're all loving this weather at the moment, but this weather is not it's not normal weather for May in the UK. Nature loss is real. Inequality in the value chain is real. Social health crises are real. And business has got to navigate these factors along with delivering shareholder expectations of increasing returns against a backdrop of geopolitical tensions that have not been seen for generations. So there are many, many plates to keep spinning in this book, A World of Ours. And many of them are covered by the sustainability agenda. But if we talk sustainability, then we're not going to make progress on them because they're seen as too inflammatory, and we just have to be very thoughtful about where we want to talk boldly about this, with that tenacity and that pragmatism that Karen sort of introduced me with. So where do you start? And I know you are dealing with graduates and undergrads day in, day out. And from a graduate perspective, I don't think it's simply a case of becoming a specialist in decarbonisation and carbon accounting. Everything is connected, and it's important to understand those relationships. So I'm going to talk about something that is quite, another topic that can be controversial. Many of our customers, for example, want us to reduce the amount of plastic that we use, and some consumers say, why aren't we using glass bottles? And packaging, it's a real challenge. There is no magic solution at the moment. apart from reuse. And that's not magic from a commercial perspective because it's exceptionally complex and expensive to implement. But it demonstrates the complexities that we face. You know, plastic bottles are lightweight, they are resealable, so they reduce food waste, they have a lower carbon footprint than other packaging materials. The problem becomes when they're not recycled and they become waste. Glass and aluminium are relatively easy to recycle, however, currently use a lot of fossil fuel-based energy during their manufacture and reuse. And in the case of aluminium, drive significant land use and nature loss as a result of bauxite mining. And what about the conditions of the miners? Meanwhile, cartons are made from renewable sources, but they are multi-layered and very, very difficult to recycle. And they have a higher carbon footprint than the demonized plastic bottle. So yes, we could increase the recycled content of plastic bottles further. However, there isn't enough food grade plastic in Europe to be able to do that. Yeah, we could import it from other regions of the world, but the value chain, as all of you know, is very opaque. And what about the working conditions? So hopefully I've gone into a lot of detail there, but hopefully that just demonstrates that you can't just consider carbon. There are so many other factors that we need students to be thinking about as they're going into the world of employment. Therefore, systems thinking, this is a massive one for me, is a critical skill to understand those relationships and those interconnections of our activities, you know, and how this impacts business, how it impacts customers, regulators, civil society, and of course, the world in which we live. So let's take a look at some of the sustainability roles at an organisation such as Britvic Soft Drinks, now Carlsberg Britvic. Within the central team, there were two of us focused on strategy, engagement and project management, particularly where we were exploring something new to the business, such as regenerative agriculture, and nature restoration. The other three people in my team, it will come as no surprise, were focused on reporting because there's so much reporting to do. So this was monthly and quarterly tracking of carbon, water, safety, recycled plastic, calories. This then feeds into the annual reporting cycle that requires auditing. And this team are also responsible for our Scope 3 carbon accounting, working really closely with our procurement colleagues. And then in procurement, we have roles that are focused on working with our suppliers, getting that Scope 3 data, but also, oops, I've moved too far, let me go. I've now got completely lost, so bear with me a moment. There we go. No, it's not. Yes, it is. There we go. So we have got, working with our suppliers and putting in favourable terms or sustainable clauses in our contracts in return for favourable payment terms. And then in supply chain, we've got a team of engineers who are looking to see how we can be more efficient in our water and energy use. How can we use renewable energies? And there are examples of this across the business. And if you look at this chart, regardless of where your students and your undergrads are focusing, whether that's legal, whether it's HR, whether it's marketing or IT, there are elements that are really key to sustainability. So fundamentally, every role has the potential to be a sustainability role. So I'd like to move on to leadership skills here. These are in no particular order, but I began with my carbon confession, and I think humility is really important. We don't have all the answers. The solutions are likely to come from other people, and we're learning more about sustainability every day. And we have to be collaborative because that's how we get solutions from others. We need to be incredibly curious and learn and get those ideas from the most unexpected places sometimes. But there's no point in me talking to a line operator about energy efficiency. What do I know about running that line? I need to go and talk to those people running that line to understand, how do we make the lines more efficient? How do we, have fewer breakdowns so that we use fewer, less water and we're doing fewer cleaning cycles, for example. Storytelling is a massive part. I've touched on that as well. You know, some of the issues that we talk about can be a little abstract. So how do we make that tangible and relevant to the people that we want to change their behaviors and perhaps invest differently in the business? And also for our external stakeholders and internal employees, how do we demonstrate the process that we're making? How do we inspire action? So storytelling with proof points is really important to get the attention of both the hearts and the minds of our colleagues and our partners and our stakeholders. Now, communication is a two-way thing. Listening to others' ideas, increasing the diversity of the solutions open to us, and understanding the barriers to change, because we all work in sustainability. We know there are an awful lot of barriers to change. And we're not superhuman. Yes, I have a lot of energy. My team have an awful lot of energy, but we have to empower others. We have to sort of coach others and trust others to, you know, to go ahead and start working on these projects. So we can't be a control freak. Harness others' energy to forge a way ahead and learning as they go. And finally, there are going to be knockbacks. So resilience, particularly at this moment in time, there's an awful lot, you know, if you read an awful lot about burnout of sustainability directors and CSOs, I mean, it's not unique to sustainability people, I know, but you know, people, you have to learn to look after yourself, and you have to, you know, learn to make sure you're doing the right energy, you know, exercise and eating the right things and having, you know, all of those things that build resilience, that enable you to go in, day out, and change the way that we do business. And the future C-suite. So a number of your students, you know, will have ambitions to reach to the top of the organisations for which they work. And I thought it was worth looking at some of the core skills here of that the C-suite will need in the future. You know, we're operating in a VUCA world. This requires strong leadership and no longer top-down command and control. We need leaders who can create agile organisations. Collaboration is absolutely key, not something that business has necessarily been, you know, great at in recent years, because it's all about beating the competition. So this is where, you know, the business needs to understand, well, where are we going to beat the competition, but where do we need to change the business model that we all operate in, and we need to collaborate. And those, you know, businesses need to develop those muscles very, very quickly. Still, it's got to set the strategic direction. Strategic direction might change slightly now in this VUCA world, so that agility is absolutely key. And how do you allocate those resources? That's not changed, and that's not changed over recent years. But instead of just allocating financial resources, human resources, natural resources, these decisions must be made with a people, planet, and a performance lens. A short-termism can no longer be business as usual. And you will all have read Karen's research, so I've just stolen, as I stole carbon confessions from Stu earlier, stealing with pride, Karen's a word cloud from Karen's research that was published last year. So you can see an awful lot of the keywords and the skills, and you know, these leadership skills are absolutely critical. Communication, influencing, leadership, engagement, resilience, and confidence. It's not all about the technical skills, and that's one of the key pieces here. So how can a university education that you are all providing support the development of these skills? You know, I've talked a great deal about the skills that, from my experience in sustainable business, and I've pulled together a few key elements that I would encourage graduates to build on as they enter the world of work. Number one, understand how to develop the business case. Relying on people's values is not sufficient to galvanize action. You need to appeal to both the head as well as the heart, as I said before. And this space is evolving all of the time. Continue to be curious. You know, having that love of learning throughout, you know, your career is absolutely key. Systems thinking, How do all of the moving parts interact? Could there be some, what are the intended and unintended consequences? What are some of the co-benefits of particular actions? And be prepared to challenge orthodoxies, to challenge the norm. Embrace diverse perspectives, from outside the business, from inside the business. Identify your critical friends, and they will help you challenge some of those business orthodoxies. And I said before, historically business has been about competition, but some of them we do need to collaborate to a very large extent. A great example from soft drinks is the deposit return scheme in the UK. And then this communication and engagement sort of goes throughout what I've been talking about today, because you need to be inspiring others, you need to be doing the storytelling, you need to be engaging others to actually act sustainably. And there are some additional resources there, but before I go on, actually, I just wanted to talk about some of the processes that we have been through when we are recruiting, because I thought that might be helpful. We tend to recruit an awful lot internally, those cross-functional moves. That is more cost effective for a lot of businesses, and people understand the business, which is absolutely fundamental. I have, also learned that sometimes people who have been focused purely on ESG reporting or carbon accounting, they're very, very passionate about their topic, and they have all of the storytelling and the engagement. But they perhaps don't have the process and the rigor that is required for some of the reporting that we now need, now that it's all audited, which means I actually steal a lot of people from the finance team, because there are so many transferable skills from finance. I'm probably a bit biased, being a management accountant myself. Other people that I have recruited externally, again, sort of on the reporting side, they've had a very analytical background. And that is what I'm looking for self-starters. An awful lot of businesses, yes, there are lots of consultancies out there, but they're very expensive. And I would much prefer to build that knowledge inside the business and keep that, rather than being a slave to continually paying the consultants to do the work for you and effectively outsourcing it. So it's really important that they're self-starters, that they're analytical, that they get on with people, because, if I take my reporting analyst, he is talking to engineers at site, he's talking to people in procurement, he's talking to people in R&D and marketing, all across the business, to get the information that he requires. So those communication skills are really key. And in that, we'll have the first interview, and then the second interview, there will be, a simple carbon calculation that we will ask people to prepare, have a look, the most recent recruitment that we have done, looking at people, taking some data and trying to analyze, where are the anomalies within the data? How do we clean that data up? Because anyone who's been involved in scope 3 accounting knows that the data can be, it's not quite as straightforward as extracting things from the financial ledgers. So that's what that second interview might involve. And then someone on the more strategic and project management side, showing that sort of that get up and go, that initiative, and we will set them a case study and ask them to come and present, their recommendations, whether that's on a water strategy, or it might be on an, employee engagement strategy. It could be on anything. And those are the typical sort of things that we will ask people to do in their interviews. Okay. I've got no idea how long I've been talking, so there are some other slides there, and I will send you the latest version, Karen. Carol Dweck, growth mindset, I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with it, but it's always learning, particularly in this space. Harvard Business Review, making learning part of your daily routine. Amazing If, these are an agency that we used at Britvic, so they have a squiggly careers toolkit. People are often looking at, how do we get promoted? And it's not necessarily moving up all of the time. It's really important to get that breadth of experience and see what will you learn from a role, not just how much are you going to be paid and, what status are you going to get, look at all the different building blocks that you think are required so that you do have that systems thinking and you really do understand the business. And then that makes it much easier for you to be an effective change agent within the business as well. Survival of the fittest, which is a report that came out last September, talking about competitive sustainability as well. So this is this new era of sustainability, about resilience, and opportunity, and adaptation. And Project Drawdown as well has got an awful lot of sort of action guides for different job functions that might be helpful for some of your students. And I think that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. So much for us to unpack and take away. And perhaps for the audience, whilst we're waiting for any questions, if you can put your hand up and I'll come to you in a moment. I love the way that you started with the climate confessions. So could invite everyone to pop your climate confession into the chat to break the ice a little. And whilst waiting for those to come in, if I could take the privilege of the first question to talk us through your statement around every role has the potential to be a sustainable role, and what kind of challenges you saw to that in practice. Is it really true that that's possible?
Yes, it's true, it's possible, but the crux of your question is really important there as well. People have to be willing. So if we take one of our lawyers, for example, really fantastic. She was involved in the regulations and greenwashing. So we already had a marketing code in soft drinks. It's really important, with regard to marketing to children and that sort of thing, that were really strict guidelines around that. And then we built on that with sort of a green claims code to make sure that if we were making any claims, that we would have the backup for it and we weren't falling foul of any CMA regulations. So that's the Competition and Markets Authority. And all the new green legislation coming down the line. So they did, it was a case of having, and she was very keen to do that. Wherever you are in the business, there are opportunities. However, businesses still report quarterly in the large part, certainly every 6 months, to investors. And sometimes if you are in the firing line, if you're in procurement, and over the last 5 years, and our procurement team have done amazing things in terms of sustainability, really, really incredible, the way that we have made such good progress in terms of our conversations. However, as all of you know, if you're working in the business space, the supply chain costs and supply chain inflation over the last 5 years has been incredible. And we have had various crises, whether that's a CO2 crisis that we need to carbonate our drinks, whether that's finding enough lorry drivers. There was a massive shortage of lorry drivers. There's currently, I think there's a good example of oranges. A citrus greening disease is wiping out, because of monocultures. Citrus greening disease is wiping out orange groves. So inflation of orange juice, and we use a lot of orange juice in Robinson Squash and many of our brands. So if you're faced with the CFO and the CEO going, how are you managing this inflation? Are you going to want to pay an extra 10-15% on top of that to fund a regenerative agriculture program? It's a real challenge. And so, it's not easy. And those conversations as well, they come directly. Why is the CEO and the CFO asking that? Well, that's what the investors are asking as well. And this is where you have to, challenge the orthodoxies as well. Give you another example of, I would talk to investors regularly, and they'd ask me, "Yeah, Sarah, initially at the beginning they wanted us to be more ambitious on water." And they would ask us about various things. I said, yes, but I mean, I was talking to the fund managers, not just the ESG analysts. Well, you need to make sure that you are asking the CEO and the CFO these questions as well. You only ask them, how are they going to get margins up to pre-COVID levels, for example? How are you dealing with that input cost inflation? Now, you don't need to repeat the conversation, but just say, I've spoken to your sustainability team, and, just so that water is very important to me, and agriculture is very important to me. And so we've got to make sure that those messages come true. And if you look at the whole value chain, it's very easy to point the finger at farmers, point the finger at consumers. It's everybody in the value chain. We've all got to play our part, and we've all got to change our behaviours. And I think unlocking the finance transition, is really critical. And that is one of the key, I think, one of the key unlocks, because an awful lot of the technology is there, but our behaviour and unlocking that the financing of that is really important. So yeah, it's there if you look for it, but it depends sometimes who speaks loudest and who shouts loudest when it comes to your conversation around that C-suite table.
Great, thank you. And that's highlighting the importance of reframing this from sustainability to risk and resilience, as you said. Susanna.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Sarah, for wonderful sharing. I actually put my question in the chat there. Last Christmas, I went over to the US and then talked to a couple. It's not a good sample of young financial experts who are working on impact investing and all that. And then they are saying that the problem is very unstandardized way of sustainability or ESG reporting, and more investors within the field are actually not buying in. So in general, the question is how far investors are really paying attention to all those indices you mentioned, like DJSI, to such an extent that corporations are really internalizing the externalities they create. Moreover, are they actually impressing investors? And I was once involved in sustainability and CSR consultancy project with a big firm. Those sustainability reports have nothing to do with the team leaders or the business units. The sustainability reports are actually graded, yes, by the performance and all the processes, but by somebody, an external team. So what you've mentioned just now in terms of sustainability penetrating the whole value chain, well, it looks like the business units leaders are doing what they are doing, but the sustainability elements or essence just pull out. And it's not an integrated process. Anyway.
You're absolutely right. And that's where we need to get to. We need to get to an integrated process. And I think in the US investors have always been a lot more skeptical around sustainability anyway. European investors are still, more interested, but you're spot on. I mean, I'm very proud of our climate and risk report that started off as TCFD, so Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures. But we've got to make sure it's not a tick box exercise, and investors actually have to read it. So I think this is, Susanna, that's the crux of your question, is how do we embed it in the business? And this is a lot of the process that we went through, and it comes back to Karen's question as well, every role being a sustainability role and building the business case. We had some real drop the mic moments when we were doing a bit of a show and tell between the different exec members around water, for example, and there's been lots in the press over the last month about the UK being sort of water stressed, and East Anglia and the Southeast is more water stressed than parts of Africa and the Middle East at the moment. These things, when you're a soft drinks company and you tell the exec, the water companies have a legal obligation to supply domestic use, but not business use. So suddenly water moves up the agenda. As I said before about oranges, oranges are, or an orange juice. Tropicana, would be a useful case study for you to use. But they have issued profit warnings because they can't get hold of enough juice. There have been, I was talking to a colleague of mine who works in retail, and they had a glut of back to school coats for children because there was an unseasonably warm autumn and they didn't sell the coats. And you could say, well, wait until a bit later, but then it was Christmas and people were more interested in buying Christmas crackers, than they were in buying coats. So it's getting these examples and really bringing it in. It's not, talking about sort of net zero is very, very important. We need to get to net zero, but actually, if we do an awful lot of the other things, if we invest in regenerative agriculture, we invest in circular economy for packaging, if we looking at replenishment for water and improving agriculture in the value chain, decarbonisation will happen because it will be an outcome of those things. But it's so important that we make it, you touched on materiality. And yes, there's that double materiality, really important for CSRD. So that's the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive in Europe, has wheeled back a little bit with the EU Omnibus. But fundamentally, that double materiality is really important. How do we impact business? But how does business impact the environment and social structures? And how does it impact us? Because if businesses do that double materiality well, that's where they'll see it needs to start moving up on their risk register. And that is when you start having those much richer conversations. And it moves away from, oh, yes, well, we've got CDP-A, we've got our gold star. I am hoping, and no disrespect to Dow Jones, CDP, or any of those, I am hoping that they will become surplus to requirements in a few years' time, because actually businesses should be, businesses should be doing this anyway. If they are serious about being here in 10 years' time, businesses need to be looking at this. And it's important, I think, something like CDP can get you asking yourself the right questions within a business. But I think if you use some of this regulation in the spirit as opposed to in the letter, that is really valuable. So that is where, TCFD was a massive unlock for us. And I got different members of the ESG committee to own a different pillar. So the supply chain director owned decarbonisation, procurement owned agriculture, marketing owned health and well-being and those things. And that was a massive unlock because they actually learned a bit more about it and goes, oh yeah, this is really relevant to our business. But it's not easy. It's not easy to get that time on the exec agenda. I was very tenacious, and sometimes different characters can be a blocker or an unlocker. So it's really important to identify, map your network, and how can you get your message across. Not simply Sarah turning up and preaching, which I don't like to do. I try and link it in and get other people to pass the messages on as well to reinforce it.
There are a number of questions in the chat that I can go through unless anybody wants to come on camera now and ask their question directly. I will go through those. Michael has made a couple of comments around, I think, the materials you were talking about, the comparison with materials, coffee cups, disposal types, the capacity to recycle is limited, noting Northern Ireland, for example, there, and then just quickly continues below. As a green code, I'd welcome seeing posters in coffee cup chains highlighting what happens if individuals dispose of their cups sensibly. Barbara.
Yeah.
Michael, do you want to say something?
Yes. I know when I bring a disposable coffee cup, it'll end up in the bin. Whereas when I bring my own metal cup, I get extra points and I feel I'm making a slight difference or benefit. But I see so many other people just take a coffee cup and bin it, or even just drop it at the side of the car. And I know they don't dispose so easily. I also know that disposal and recycling of a coffee cup is difficult within Northern Ireland. We don't have the right resources to do so. But that's not publicised.
Yeah, and I think Michael, this comes to my point about everyone in the value chain, from the consumer all the
Exactly.
way through to the farmer. Everybody, we've all got to change our behaviours.
Yes.
We all live our nice lives, and we might drive, or we might try and make some conscious decisions around how we travel. But fundamentally, we are all consuming too much. We are all wasting too much. And we're not reusing enough. And it is a challenge. But we have all been taught now, if you turn the clock back 30 years, it was a reuse system, or that you didn't have the coffee chains in the UK 30 years ago. And all of the soft drinks were in a reuse system as well. So this is one of the things that we are up against, everybody, and how do we this is where storytelling is really important as well. How do we get that message across with consumers, with shoppers, as well as everybody else in the value chain? And some people are better at it than some people are better at it than others. But fundamentally, I know it's disheartening, which is where the resilience comes in as well, because you just got to keep going, keep going.
Barbara.
Yeah, I was attracted by your word on sustainability coaching. So I was kind of reflecting, what do you think is most important, coaching or mentoring, especially in terms of a students' perspective and young professionals? I'm asking that because I work. I'm part of the Institute of Corporate Sustainability and Responsibility. So we do mentoring of young professionals in the sector. And often I found that they are kind of left alone to bring forward initiatives, and there is so much variety of information out there, and even just making these decisions is really difficult. So yeah, I find that possibly, I don't know, I think mentoring, perhaps a long-term relationship, but obviously there is so yeah, I don't know, what is your view on that?
I think there is probably a role for both. And it depends what the student wants to get out of a particular situation. So you may want, if you have a good relationship with a mentor, and that's a long-term relationship, then that could be incredibly valuable. When it comes to coaching, if there is a particular skill that you want to harness a bit more, for example, someone in my team hadn't had we were the first industry or business that she'd worked in. She'd worked in an industry body previously. And she was talking to some of our sales directors for some coaching to increase, her commerciality. So I think it really does sort of depend on the situation. And I think there is a role for both. Sorry, that sounds a bit of a cop out, but I think it depends on what what the aspirations are, what is the learning requirement of the individual at that moment in time, on what they're with regard to what they're working to, or is it a longer term, sort of more strategic piece in terms of their career that they're thinking about, which may be where mentoring comes in.
Yeah, but so this kind of leads to the other question, which is, especially when you are encouraging younger professionals or our own students, some of them are very interested in sustainability. Maybe they've been working, with an Actus project, so they aspire to those sustainability professions. So yeah, it's I suppose it's fantastic, this idea that every job can be a sustainability job, but obviously in terms of them growing their skill set, I think working for a specialized consultancy at the beginning of the career might help in growing that profile at this specific age and time. What do you think?
It can do. I have seen some people who haven't necessarily had the skill set that's required, and they you know, I can't fault them for their passion and their energy, but sometimes they lack, they haven't always had the pragmatism required, and they're just, well, why don't you do this? Because this is the right thing to do. Well, we've got a business to run and we can't do it quite like that. But, you know, let's try and find, you know, it's about finding sometimes the compromises and things that do work. And that's why it's really important to understand, you know, have that commercial knowledge and understand how the different parts of the business operate. You know, there is a place for technical knowledge. I'm not dismissing that at all. But I think you need, you know, if you look at a lot of sustainability leaders, they do, you know, a lot of them have come across from different parts of the business because they have got that commerciality. But that doesn't mean to say that it can't be taught. But I think there's nothing. There've been a number of roles in my career where they haven't necessarily been my favorite roles, but I've learned an awful lot. And it's what you can learn. Sometimes, you know, you're sitting in an office, in a head office. I mean, you know, what do you mean Tesco say X, Y, and Z? Don't they know this, that, and the other? And then you go and actually work on the Tesco account and you go, oh, crikey, they're serious, aren't they? So sometimes these perspectives can only be garnered by working in different parts of the business. So it's great coming along going, yeah, you've got to be net zero by 2050, but understanding the pathway and the practicalities of that is really important. So yes, you know, I think, you know, there's always going to be a role, particularly at the moment, for reporting, sustainability reporting, because it is such a massive industry, and people are grappling with CSRD, even though it has been rolled back a little bit. But it, you know, it depends what people want to do. Maybe they might start with reporting and then they move into sort of more commercial, action-oriented roles.
Yeah, thanks for very comprehensive. Thank you.
Before moving into the other questions on the chat, Jonathan, is there anything that you'd like to ask?
No, I'm really keen to get to Veronica's question and then is it Ifat's question as well, actually, because one is about the workplace and one is about the university. And so I'm interested in Sarah's perspectives on those. So, if I just carry on with Veronica's question was, in practice, how do you encourage continued development of systems thinking, which you emphasized so much in your presentation? I work with apprentices who potentially have more siloed thinking due to their work role experiences. In the classroom learning, we do aim to stretch thinking. However, they will revert quickly back in their workplace. And I wondered, perhaps you can reflect on how you've developed systems thinking, not necessarily with apprentices, but in the work environment.
Yeah, I think it's having those conversations and having everybody in the room, and it's not easy, not easy by any means, and some people, you have more luck with some individuals than others because they're more naturally predisposed, but it's making sure that people have those relationships. One of the things that I did at Britvic, I had my Healthier People, Healthier Planet task force that I got everyone from across the business who was interested in sustainability. You didn't have to have sustainability in your job title for that. So we had our QSE director, we had R&D directors, we had procurement, we had marketing people, we had my team, people from across different businesses and geographies. And this is where we would share ideas. And it's that regular that regular interaction and making sure, to your point earlier, that people are happy to share what they've learned, share where they've failed, and having that regular rhythm, and making sure that your engineers, you know, are talking to the different people in the business. Have a conversation with, you know, if one of the lines is broken, what impact does that have on delivering the product to the customer, and have those conversations with different parts of the business to understand the impact on your stakeholders. But because it's very difficult and not everybody thinks that way, and we're all made differently, which is absolutely fantastic and as it should be. but we just have to try extra hard to increase that dialogue between different functions and different people, and create those networks if need be, if it's not happening naturally.
I was wondering also, in terms of Veronica's question, whether there is actually a role for the education provider to be working more integrated in a more integrated fashion with the organization, rather than restricting their role only to what happens in the classroom when the apprentice is actually with them. Now, I don't work directly with apprentices, so I don't know with the extent to which that's feasible in terms of relationship between the at organizational level, but that seemed to be one additional kind of dimension to that, certainly. I'm sort of aware.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think so. I would probably agree. I mean, we have people within our sort of HR team who manage the apprenticeship program, but equally they're not the people necessarily they're doing the placing. But I think it's very much, it could add value for, it doesn't have to happen all of the time, but for some of you guys to perhaps, who is the line manager of these apprenticeships? Who is the engineering manager? Who has all of these people under their wing, and how can you maybe invite yourself to a couple of one of their all-day meetings or workshops, so that you understand what the reality is of the conversations and the daily challenges that they're facing in their roles.
Thank you. Karen, do you want to take over, or shall we jump to, I realized I skipped over Ifat's question actually, which was about getting buy-in, faculty buy-in, and maybe Sarah is less able to sort of comment on faculty buy-in, but there's a lot of other people in the room who might want to comment on that question as to, what key things have enabled you to get faculty buy-in, and maybe just 2 minutes of people jumping in and saying what's worked for them might be great. So does anybody want to jump in at this point?
I would like to expand it a bit, that what is
Oh,
happening.
yeah. By all means.
In my college, since we have become a signatory of PRIME, we have been working very hard on this, that we have to integrate SDGs in our curriculum, experiential learning, and research. Now, once we started looking at the reports after 1 year, they look fantastic. We are so integrated with SDGs left and right that it seems that we are the only people who are working towards developing responsible students or responsible leaders for tomorrow. That is our mission statement. But when you look at the attitude of the faculty members, it seems that I have to monitor every semester to make sure that they work on these specific aspects. As soon as no one is monitoring, immediately the focus or their, let's say, their attitude towards having those elements within the part of teaching or in experiential learning or research, that again dies away. So this is something, it's like the constant monitoring is fatiguing me. So I'm just wondering if anyone is having a suggestion how to get their buy-in over here.
Who'd like to come in? I'm sure there are many experienced people who'd like to comment here.
I mean, can I just comment that, I think it's also, it's interesting, the question, because obviously it overlaps with the same issues that I'm sure a sustainability director has in a work environment, trying to get all the colleagues in and getting the buy-in. So yeah, engagement and communication, I suppose it's kind of like an important thing. Somebody put in the comments, organize a PRIME conference. So yeah, I suppose I think there is a sense of being overwhelmed maybe by all the things that staff has to do. If it's not part of your research expertise, then maybe you feel a little bit out of your depth. I suppose it's steps, making it become part of the culture. So making sure that it's kind of like the culture of the department. So for example, in my university, we're trying to spotlight these topics in away days. There is the research cluster organizes CPD events. So it has to become part of the culture, and communication and engagement, and with engagement with the industry as well, like with events like this one. So it's a long journey.
It is a long
Which-
journey, and it's not a straightforward one either. I mean, I would say from our experience, the more you can integrate the questions and the requirements into existing procedures, rituals, traditions, and organizational expectations, not just for externally facing annual reviews, but for the way in which programs are reviewed on a regular basis, the way in which student evaluations are collected, and the kinds of questions that you ask there. The more that you can get it into those things where it automatically comes up as a question rather than having to be artificially or additionally introduced, the more you're likely to find it becomes a real living part of the organization. But it's years, it's not months.
Yeah, and I would probably say, I mean, it's very similar to welcome to my world. It's around prioritization, because there are 17 SDGs and you'll be doing some of them more than others. And this is where, as education establishments, well, how many KPIs do you expect me to have? And now you're asking me to have another 17 on sustainability, one for each of the SDGs. So this is where, going back to the materiality and where do you really think you can make a difference and move the dial and have an impact? And yes, you feed into all SDGs, but there are going to be a handful that really resonate and are really very valid, and it's that materiality piece. That's where you can make an impact, rather than and focusing on those as opposed to trying to get people to focus on all of them as well as everything else. Remember all of those spinning plates that they're trying to juggle.
That is
Thanks.
true. Actually, I really like the conversation that Jonathan started talking about the apprenticeship, because that is the area that I didn't focus, that we could integrate that element of SDGs over there as well, so that they start learning from the industry if they are not getting that from the faculty members. So that could be very interesting. I think this is the new discussion that I have to take back to my college. Additional work.
Additional work. There's never less work. I'm afraid there's always
That
there's
is
always
true.
more work, which is where the resilience bit comes in that Sarah was talking about. Because I'm aware of time running out, and we said we'd finish by 1:45. I'm aware we haven't talked about Amanda's question yet, and I think Amanda particularly is Amanda still with us? I'm just looking around the room. Actually, she may have left, so it's probably less important. It was about your industry collaboration on the deposit return scheme that she was asking about, and others may be interested, so you may want to just comment briefly on
Yeah,
that.
well, I mean, it's one of these massive system changes. It's not something I was involved with directly. There was someone else in the UK business responsible for that. But yes, it requires an awful lot of collaboration, pre-competitive conversations across not just the soft drinks industry, but also the whole beverage industry. And it may well cover other sort of food elements as well over time. And the retailers, of course, because they are the ones all having to implement it. It's a massive challenge. And I'm sure some of you went to see Kyoto whilst that was on in the West End, about the COP agreement. And I think a lot of the conversations are not dissimilar, because you have got some organizations may want to move faster than others. Some organizations might have more glass in their portfolio than plastic, so they might want to include glass instead of just aluminium and plastics. You have got retailers who want to disrupt it because or some do, some don't, because they don't have space in their stores to do it, and it's going to cost them money, and it's going to take up space that they can't sell things on. So it's really, it's a incredible feat in mapping your stakeholders and understanding what is important to them, swallowing pride, trying to find compromise, listening to other people's ideas, to and work for the greater good, because we need this, and we can't continue in a take make consume, dispose model. We do need to move to a circular model, but it's not easy, which is why it has taken so long. And it's so easy to use it as a political football as well, which is why it got delayed in Scotland, and may well be delayed in Wales as well. There are so many factors, but you need the patience of a saint. You need to listen to everybody, and it is a key area for collaboration. Otherwise, there will be much harsher penalties across all industry. So it's act now or see what's could well come down the line, which would be even more stringent.
So the patience of a saint and the stubbornness of a mule, probably that combination. It's
Yes.
a strange one to imagine. Unless are there any final questions? I haven't spotted any in the and there are various comments from Fernanda around collaboration, but I don't think it's a question, but I'd certainly recognize.
I can see that. Yeah, I used to
issues.
hate group assignments as well. And my daughter, I see there is someone from Nottingham here. My daughter's at Nottingham University, and she's just doing her finals now. It hasn't changed since I left university. It's tough, but actually, it's how you get things done. You can't. There is so much for us to do. It'll be really inefficient if we all go off and come up with our own solutions. If we do it collaboratively, we'll come up with a stronger solution and we won't be wasting as many resources in the process. So whilst it is painful, and sometimes, there are people who are extrovert, there are people who are introvert, but this is where the magic is. To get people to work together. And yes, if I had a soul for that group work piece from when I was at Brooks, we'd all be very happy, wouldn't we?
Well, thank you for that empathy. We appreciate that. I'm going to hand back to Karen to close us off.
I wonder quickly if anybody left here is a student, and if so, we'd love to hear your thoughts, whether in the chat or to unmute. And ultimately, students are our key stakeholder, and in business where it's all about grassroots action alongside the CEO's executive board, we've got students as our secret power. So the more that we can continue to work with our students to enact change and to drive this forward in the curriculum on the campus, then that's where we can have key impact. I haven't seen any comments from anybody being a student, but it would be nice, and we will feed that back to you, Sarah, if anybody gets in touch.
Thank you.
Watch the recording, etc. But thank you so much. You've given us plenty to think about, and we will follow up with you. And if anybody would like to ask Sarah any other questions, etc., I'm sure she'd be open to do so.
Yeah,
So
really happy to.
thank you again, everyone, for joining. And to you, Sarah, big round of applause. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Fridays.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.